If there's one thing I've learned over the years, is that there is a lot of anime out there. Yeah, I know that's an obvious statement, but you'd be amazed by just how many well-respected, iconic, and genuinely pretty good anime exist just beyond the commonly recommended popular ones. Now, you could spend all your time just watching those popular shows and be more than satisfied, but I'm a freak who watches a little too much anime as is, and am looking for any excuse to put off One Piece even longer. You know what they say, 3 random anime a day keeps the One Piece away, and while I can't quite do that since I have a life, I'll settle for 3 a month. The rules are the rules, but if I shorten these intros anymore, YouTube's not going to let me swear in the main segment, so let's go over them again for the kids in the back. Every month, randomanime.org spits me out 3 1 to 2 core anime with no regard for age or quality, and I give them 3 episodes to catch my interest. You end up dredging up some pretty wild stuff with this method, and only some of it is imploded submarine guts. I'm sure that joke's gonna age just fine. Here's a great philosophical question. What even is the purpose of art? I think we can all come reasonably close to a definition of good art, but what about the inverse? What makes for truly bad art? Is the mark of bad art something so painfully incompetent that it starts breaking down on every conceivable level, or something that is so painfully boring that I can't even hate watch it? Can something really be so bad that it's good? Following the escapades of a recently reincarnated son of a cult leader, 2023's KamiKatsu sees our favorite reformed orthodox cultist Yukuto Urabe bring religion back to a godless world in desperate need of some Jesus. Problem is, Jesus' schedule was full and human sacrifice isn't going to stop itself, so in his place we have the lolly gremlin Lord Mitama. Tremble before her. Yeah, in a cruel twist of fate, Yukuto is tasked with saving the world by spreading the exact thing he swore off in his dying breath. The only thing more amazing than the irony in that is just that the show managed to come together, because if you couldn't tell from the clips thus far, it's a special breed of awful. Allegedly produced on a bare-bones budget and time frame that'll put Mappa to shame, the team behind KamiKatsu realized pretty early that they had a dumpster fire in their hands, and so hard leaned into it to create one of the most spectacular dumpster fires I've ever laid eyes on. Editing that randomly cuts off the voice actors, horrendously boring storyboards, poorly composed CG, and pixel art to cover over anything that would be remotely complicated to animate are only the tip of the iceberg of this production from hell. And yes, that pixel art probably ate up most of the budget, so don't worry, they recycle all of it to stitch together the ED, because of course they do. And if you thought the story was going to help, no. The characters are flatter than their god, and the tone is all over the place. Episode 1 alone jumps from a gag where the obligatory, well-endowed but hopelessly stupid waifu bait jerks off the MC to a scene portraying the horrors of human sacrifice, and it only gets worse from there. Yet, in the raging inferno of burnt light novel volumes and crusty body pillows that make up this mess, there is still hope yet. Whether intentional or not, the series does have a surprisingly competent comedic backbone. Some of the faster cuts make for great punchline setups, and it's clear that at least the dub cast had an absolutely wild time delivering their lines throughout. Yes, I watched dubbed, sue me. There's definitely enough here to end up with a Ghost Stories tier mess that somehow lands on its feet through constant adversity, but the instances of pursuing an actual plot dulls that dream just a tad. To be fair, I don't know if trying to string together a normal plot and failing just makes the show all the funnier, but I'll leave this one up to you. Viewer discretion is advised. If you know me, you'll know I'll never want to turn down a good fantasy. Mars Red last month definitely got me in the mood, and when most of the genre is loaded with vaguely medieval D&D settings, good works in other settings are hard to come by. I guess technically 2020's MAGATSU WAHREIT is more Chaika than Mars Red, but whatever. Following a pair of dual protagonists as they get swept up in a smuggling incident, MAGATSU benefits from a much cleaner aesthetic and its world building than most of its contemporaries. There's some clear thought put into establishing its setting in pre-production, even if the plot kicks in before we as the audience get to see much of it. Unlike something like Chaika that throws shit at the wall and hopes that it sticks, MAGATSU's setting feels much more believable, and with the focus on 2 low-level members of this society, it can make its world feel much bigger and open to exploration than it gives on. By jumping back and forth between its two protagonists, MAGATSU is able to frame the events of its plot in multiple lights and reach some interesting conclusions in the process. It's inevitable that their two paths will cross once again, but the build-up to this usually trite cliché is interesting enough to hold those stories together. Where the story does begin to struggle, though, is in some of its finer details. Its character designs and art are pretty nice, but the story frequently takes place at night or in dark places, so your screen is nearly constantly bathed in black. It does a massive disservice to the otherwise decent art in the show, and that isn't all. The overall plot and setting can also be sloppy at the extremes. Despite feeling grounded as a mostly historical fantasy, Episode 1 mentions a race of lizard-like monsters, and Episode 3 focuses on a side story about fighting a witch-like enemy. In most stories, these disparate fantasy elements are fine, but it feels jarring in a world that feels perfectly content without it, and opens the door for the world building to fall apart in its later acts. At the same time, by rushing to its inciting incident, MAGATSU fails to bring a sense of purpose to any of its plots. Usually when a show starts off with a smuggling operation, it'll quickly escalate to something with more importance, but with MAGATSU that tragically isn't the case. It feels much tamer and at the same time comes off almost like busy work with no real point. To make matters worse, the little time that we do spend with our MCs does a poor job of connecting them together besides a small coincidental interaction, and doesn't give us a real reason to care for them despite being fairly entertaining to watch in a vacuum. They feel less like close friends drifting apart and more two random strangers going about their lives no matter how hectic. Overall, this comes together to make MAGATSU an entertaining enough show to kill time on, but how much you get out of it will ultimately depend on how much it lets these early concerns shape the plot. I say let them cook, even if I'm a little hesitant on what that might just unearth. Rejoice, for I bring you a month where for once I don't have to talk about any smut. Much. In a meta revolving around replicating the overly saccharine and unrealistic parts of high school romance, leave it to 2022's More Than a Married Couple But Not Lovers to hard correct in the complete opposite direction. This isn't Baby's first rom-com, but miraculously it isn't smut. Much. More Than a Married Couple focuses on high schoolers Akari Watanabe and Jiro Yakuin, who are forced to be pretend lovers for the sake of their high school's couple practical. With a premise that absurd and a female lead that bodacious, you know right from the offset what's to come, and this show delivers in spades, and yet somehow I don't completely hate it. With its standout bright color palette and strong chemistry between its leads, More Than a Married Couple makes good use of its premise to deliver a surprisingly wholesome story that only sometimes overcomplicates itself with melodrama. Akari's upfront personality but quickly dismantles facade pairs well with Jiro's bluntness, and while it's quick to gloss over its own setup, it makes up for some nice gags in the early episodes. The series sets itself up to tackle issues of team love and finding yourself through all the hormones, and ends up just being a real vibe to watch. If it does struggle anywhere though, it is in its sidecast. I know Toradora basically follows the same structure, but that show has a significantly better sidecast compared to More Than a Married Couple, and it shows when you least expect it. The drama suffers greatly for it, and the insistence on building a love triangle between the two leads and Shiori just never quite clicks. Despite best intentions, she's just kind of a thorn in the series side, and I can see this only getting worse as the series progresses. Unfortunately, that's kind of a big deal, given how most rom-coms either stall out or push more towards the dramatic side in the later episodes, so whether or not that risk is worth the reward is really up to you. I get the sense it laid most of its cards out early, so it's very possible that novelty will wear off quick. Question is, if I'm willing to take that risk, now isn't it? To again ask the question that I presented earlier, what even counts as bad art? I don't think anyone would ever doubt that KamiKatsu's production was an abject failure, but it is surprisingly more entertaining than most shows I've watched here because of it. Nah, it's still shit, no matter how you slice it, but it was entertaining enough to see to completion. It is comfortably the worst thing I've watched for this series, besides maybe Kanokon, and it doesn't help itself by trying to have an actual plot that somehow tries too hard to be funny when the rest of the show is able to do so unintentionally flawlessly. This show is certainly a mess, but I'd be lying if I said at the very least it wasn't a fun one. By stark contrast, MAGATSU WAHREIT does just enough to be watchable, but not quite enough to see to completion. It shines better than most, but doesn't quite have enough to make it to the end. 3 episodes were fine, but it just doesn't feel worthwhile, and I'm a bit of a busy man. Got to spend my time wisely. I really hate that I didn't hate More Than a Married Couple. Its MCs are pretty lively, and its writing is just self-aware enough to be engaging, so it made for an easy binge for my lonely heart. As for the end product, it's fine. Shiori continues to be dead weight in the series, and as the show really tries to push that love triangle between the two leads and her, it can drag in places. It takes 12 episodes to finally wedge her in at the cost of actually developing its leads, and I don't really think subsequent seasons would do much to fix that. Overall, it's enjoyable if you're a lonely fuck like me, but otherwise not worthy of your time. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know down below what your thoughts on the series discussed today are, and I hope I was helpful in narrowing down your planning list, especially with series this relevant to current discourse. If you want to see more like this, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know if there's anything I should do to improve the series moving forward. Until next time, remember to stay salty.